In this video, we're going to be pushing Sibelius to its limit, and sometimes past it, notating complex modern music. In our last video, which you can find up here, we looked at the basics of how to write music in Sibelius, as well as the different workflows it offers for writing orchestral music. In this video, we're really going to be putting it through its paces by showing you how to accomplish a variety of complex notational challenges that are often encountered by composers writing modern classical and film music. I showed you many of the notational challenges we'll be covering back in the introductory video to this series, which you can find up here. We'll start by talking about time signatures and key signatures, then move on to... Are back again for this video?
You betcha!
Oh, goody.
Well, y'all keep droning on for so long, I reckon someone's gotta keep things lively.
Uh-huh.
Hey, don't let me stop you. You were saying?
I forgot now.
Well, in that case, me and my pal Eric here are gonna show you all kind of whiz-bang notational stuff in Sibelius. Woohoo!
Yes, woohoo. There are a few places in my test piece called Which Shall I Choose that use unconventional time signatures. First, let's look at this 3+4/12 bar. Sibelius doesn't natively support non-power of 2 time signatures. However, it's fairly easy to fake. You simply enter a time signature that has the right number of notes, such as 3+4/8 in this case. And then you hide the time signature using Command-Shift-H or Control-Shift-H on Windows, and enter text with a special time signature style. We'll type 3+4, hit Enter, and then type 12. It appears on all staves, and you can adjust it as necessary by hitting the arrow keys. However, it doesn't appear in the right spot in some of the parts. And if it starts on a new system, the fake time signature won't appear at the end of the previous system, unlike a real one. Another thing that we often want to do in compound time signatures like this is include dashed bar lines between the 3-part and the 4-part. That's also pretty easy in Sibelius, just add a bar line in the right place. However, it goes through all the whole bar rests too, which isn't what you would normally want. The other thing we'll need to do is change the tempo for this one bar so that the dotted quarter in the new tempo is equivalent to a quarter note in the old tempo. So we'll enter a tempo equation by going to the Text Styles menu, then Metric Modulation, bringing up the Context menu and selecting the metric modulation we want, in this case quarter equals dotted quarter. We'll hide it using Control-H, and then we'll do the same thing in reverse at the end of the measure. So in this case, that would be dotted quarter equals quarter. Okay, now there are 2 places in this piece where we want to use different time signatures on different staves. One is this passage in the baritone part, which is almost all in triplets. In cases like this, composers sometimes use a triplet time signature like 12/8 in one part while using 4/4 in the other parts, so that the bar lines still line up. Sibelius doesn't have built-in support for this, but we can fake it pretty easily. First, we'll enter the part using triplets and hide all the triplets. In bar 10, we need a 4 tuple in a triplet time signature, so we just tell Sibelius to use 4 eighth notes in the time of 4. There's no explicit option for this, but we can type 4:4 and Sibelius will do what we want. Unfortunately, it erases all but the first note of the tuplet when we do this, so we'll have to re-enter all the other notes. Now that we've got the notes entered, we can insert a time signature change in just one part by using a text style of time signatures, one staff only. We also need to tell the singer that there's a metric modulation occurring here, and we can do that using text with special symbols in it. We don't want to use a real metric modulation because we're actually still in 4/4 at the same tempo. The other place where we want to use different time signatures in different staves, we don't want the bar lines to line up. We want our bongo drums to start in 1/4 in measure 9, then continue in 3/8 all the way up until measure 13. Unfortunately, this is much more difficult in Sibelius. It's sort of possible, but there are so many problems that I ended up just not bothering. If you want to do this, you have to make a copy of the instrument itself and set the copy to not use bar lines. Then you change instrument on the appropriate staff for whatever portion of it uses different time signatures and manually insert fake time signatures and bar lines where you want them. That works, sort of, but there are a bunch of problems. Firstly, and most seriously, even though you've put fake bar lines in the right places, they aren't actually real bars, so bar numbers don't increment. There is a way to insert a bar number change, but it applies to all parts, not just one. I didn't see any workaround for this at all. Secondly, the beaming is all off, and resetting all the beams manually is a royal pain. And lastly, the time signature changes to 1/4 for the bongo drums in measure 9, but 4/4 for all the other instruments. I couldn't find any way of hiding the 4/4 just for a single instrument, so I would have to hide it globally, insert a fake 4/4 individually for every instrument other than the bongo drums, and insert a fake 1/4 time signature for the bongos. So I decided that it was too much trouble to even try to fake.
Why on earth would you have 2 different time signatures at once? That's just dumb.
Well, to be honest, I wouldn't generally recommend it. It's very difficult to conduct, and it makes it impossible in rehearsal for a conductor to, say, start at bar 15. Instead, you have to rely on rehearsal marks.
You didn't answer my question.
Okay, well, it sometimes has its uses in small chamber groups that don't have a conductor, if grouping bars in different ways in different parts makes them easier to read. And sometimes there are complex orchestral scores with 2 or 3 different groups of instruments, each with their own conductor and their own independent time signatures.
Still seems dumb to me.
I'm just showing what's possible or not possible in each program. Use them at your own peril. I included 3 key signature challenges in this piece. First, the initial key signature is atonal, in other words, no sharps or flats, even for transposing instruments like clarinets. That's different than just C major, which would have 2 sharps in a B-flat clarinet part, for example. Happily, this is very easy in Sibelius. Just hit K and select atonal, no key. And then we can look at the B-flat clarinet part and see that there's no key signature at the beginning. The second challenge is 2 different key signatures in different parts, even for non-transposing instruments. Toward the end of the piece, we want to have the harp in G-flat major, while the rest of the orchestra is in F-sharp major. Yes, these are effectively the same key, but harpists prefer flats to sharps, which is why the harp gets its own key signature. Happily, this too is fairly easy in Sibelius. We'll just select the last 2 bars of the harp part, hit K for key signature, scroll down to More Options, and select one staff only. Unfortunately, even if you select more than one staff, it really does only change it for one staff only, but that's a minor inconvenience, so we'll just do the same thing for the lower staff. And there we have it, different key signatures for the different staves. One weird thing is the different placement of the key signatures. Maybe this is on purpose? Flats before sharps to draw attention to the fact that the key signatures are different, but it's not particularly standard. It looks strange and it takes up extra space. If we drag the key signature backward, they'll line up, but we'll still have this gap that I can't seem to get rid of, even if I drag the notes to try to fill it. The last challenge is custom key signatures. In bar 13, we're in this sort of altered E-flat minor mode with a G-flat, but an A natural, C natural, and D natural. So I wanted to write a key signature with just a G-flat, B-flat, and E-flat in that order so that it didn't look like a normal key signature. Unfortunately, this is one area that Sibelius just does not support well at all. You can kind of fake it using custom symbols. For example, you can go to the Notations menu, then select the Symbols pop-out, then choose one of the blank user-defined symbols and hit Edit. We can hit Add, select a treble clef, and move it down by one space to the correct position. Then we can hit Add, scroll down to the Accidentals section, choose the flat symbol, position it correctly so that it's on the G line. Then we can hit Add, select another flat, position it correctly for a B flat, and do the same thing for the E flat. Now that we've finished creating the symbol, we can place it in our score if we want, but it doesn't have any meaning to Sibelius. It's just a symbol after all, so it doesn't affect playback or accidental visibility. There is a hide specific accidentals plugin to fake this, but we still have to make a separate symbol like this for every combination of transposition and clef, and hide and show them in the parts differently from the score, and hide the right accidentals in each place, and then of course remember to reapply all the hacks if you change any notes.
Well, that sounds like a headache and a half.
Yeah, you're telling me.
So, where's your custom key signature then?
I decided it was too much hassle and just didn't bother.
Y'all chickened out?
Hey, I honestly don't think using custom key signatures is a great idea anyway, unless you're notating, say, traditional Persian music that might use, say, an E flat and an F sharp and a B quarter flat consistently, which would be easier for the player to remember.
Y'all still chickened out.
Why don't we just move on to the next notation challenge, okay? Now, you might be wondering what on earth could be challenging about staves, like they're about as basic as you can get. Well, as it turns out, there are a number of challenges in this piece. I'll put them in three categories: changing staves for a collection of instruments, changing staves within a single part, and cross-staff notation. First, changing staves for a collection of instruments. Violin 1 and Violin 2 both start out divisi with a solo violin playing as a separate part in bars 7 through 8. Later on in the piece, Violin 1 and Violin 2 each switch to divisi A3. So how do we accomplish these feats? It turns out that we can easily add extra staves to an existing part by hitting I for instruments, then selecting, say, Violin 1 on the right, and hitting extra staff below. We'll need a total of 4 staves, 1 solo and 3 divisi, so we'll hit it 3 times. We can label the solo staff as solo, but unfortunately we can't really label the other staves since sometimes they will be divisi and sometimes they will be unison. Now we'll just drop our music in, and then we can select all the violin 1 staves, go to Layout, and hit Hide Empty Staves. And now it looks pretty much exactly how we want it. There is one small problem, which is that I wanted to hide the violin 1 solo part on the first page, since it doesn't really come in until the second page. But unfortunately, if I do that, then it doesn't show up correctly in the part, since the system breaks are different between part and score. But still, that's not too bad. And if I really wanted, I could cut away the entirety of the solo violin staff except for bars 7 and 8 by changing the instrument to no instrument hidden. Then the solo violin would only appear for those 2 measures in the score and in the part, but that's a bit inconsistent with the rest of the notation, so I'll just leave it the way it was. Now, I should mention that if you hit Hide Empty Staves and it doesn't do anything, you need to set an engraving option as follows. Go to Appearance, then Engraving Rules, then Staves, and uncheck Show Hidden Empty Staves when using Focus on Staves. Then you should be able to see the effects of hiding staves even when you're using Focus on Staves. Next, the bass clarinet starts out on a separate staff from the other clarinets, but I wanted to combine them for a while after the third clarinetist switches to a normal B-flat clarinet. Now, combining them is easy. We just use the reduce function that we looked at earlier when condensing the oboes onto one staff. However, this still leaves a third clarinet staff. We could delete the notes on it and hide empty staves like we did with the violins, but that would erase the notes from the part as well. So what I ended up doing was duplicating the entire staff by going into the instrument screen, adding a new bass clarinet staff, and copying the original music onto the new staff, hiding the original staff entirely so that it's only used for the parts, then reducing the third clarinet part onto the existing condensed clarinet staff and deleting the notes off the copy. The other thing we have to do is to change instrument, even though it's still clarinets playing, so that we can relabel the staff as clarinets 1, 2, and 3. Then we can hide the instrument change at the end and change the label on the next system back to clarinets 1 and 2.
So, hang on, y'all got 5 staves for 3 clarinets?
Well, yeah, but they're all necessary. 3 for the parts, 2 for the score.
I guess. Seems like an awful lot of copying, though.
Yeah, and that's the problem with this approach. You end up copying the same part to at least one other staff, so if you change one, you have to remember to change the others. And the others are hidden, which makes it even more risky that you might forget.
Well, you might, Mr. Insufficient Memory.
So now, let's look at staff changes within a single part. The first type of change we'll look at is adding a new staff in the middle of an existing part.
Hang on, you did that with the fiddles already.
Violins, well, sort of, but what I'm talking about is Ossia Staves. A soloist, including vocal soloists, will expect a piano reduction along with their part so that they can practice with an accompanist before they rehearse with the orchestra, which may only happen for the first time the day before the performance. So I wrote a piano reduction of this piece as well. But part of this score is sufficiently complex that I can't really fit it in the pianist's two hands, so I needed an Ossia staff for a few bars to hold the extra notes. This is different from a 3-staff piano layout because we don't actually expect the pianist to play the extra notes. Sometimes Ossia staves are alternative parts, and sometimes they're just extra notes like this. So how can we accomplish this in Sibelius? As it turns out, it's pretty easy. You simply select the set of measures where you want to create your Ossia staff, then come over here to the Home tab and hit Ossia staff above, and then input your notes.
All that build up and it was so easy I could have done it.
Yeah, well, some programs make it easier than others. So now let's move on to changing the number of lines in a single part. This is often done in percussion parts, and that's exactly where we need it here. We need to change from a snare drum on a single line staff to toms on a 5-line staff to bongo drums on a 2-line staff, and happily Sibelius handles all of this without problem. You simply tell it to change instruments, and it will change to the appropriate type of staff for that instrument. Not only that, but it puts a cautionary 2 tom T before the change to tom-toms, and tom-toms where the tom-tom part starts. Nice and easy.
Another anticlimax?
Yeah, you probably could have done that one too. But there's one more type of staff change, and it also happens in the percussion parts. We need to change from a single staff to a grand staff where the marimba comes in, and unfortunately, Sibelius just does not support that at all. If you try to change instrument to a grand staff, it still just uses only one staff. This is a shame because marimba players tend to prefer reading from 2 staves simply because their instrument has a range of over 4 octaves and is several feet long, and it's easier to tell when they have to, sometimes quite literally, leap from one note to another that's quite far away. The last category of staff challenges is cross-staff notation, specifically cross-staff beams, tremolos, and stems. We'll cover cross-staff glissandi in our glissandi section. In Sibelius, the first two are quite simple. You just select the notes you want to move to the other staff, and hit Command-Shift-Up to move them up, or Command-Shift-Down to move them down. Again, Control instead of Command on Windows. This works for tremolos just as well, and it even takes into account the accidentals of the new staff. But as you can see, sometimes the positioning is a little bit off, and you have to manually adjust it. However, cross-staff stems have to be faked. In these 2 bars of the harp parts, I wanted the chords to be split across the staves. You can do this, kind of, by hitting X to flip the upper note so that it stems down, then dragging the stem downward so that it overlaps the other notes. But unfortunately, this makes the other staff move downward to avoid it, and even turning magnetic layout off doesn't seem to fix it. And of course, if you have beams on that note on the upper staff, you have to hide those as well. So it's kind of a hack, and I decided in the end it looked better just to use 2 separate stems. Now we're going to talk about different types of tuplets.
Tuplets?
Yeah, you know, like triplets, quintuplets, etc.
You know, there was this girl I knew back home. Her name is Betty Sue. And she married this guy, and they couldn't have kids. You know what I mean? And so they went to one of them fancy doctor types, and he gave them some newfangled treatment.
Billy.
And the next thing you know, they got quadruplets.
Billy.
I mean, you couldn't go over to their ranch without tripping over one of them rugrats. Cute little things they was, though.
Billy.
What has got you so riled up?
I'm talking about tuplets in music, not kids.
I know. You're probably going to show everyone how to make all kinds of fancy tuplets and Sibelius, and I thought people might want to hear about Betty Sue.
Okay then. Well, the first thing we're going to cover is nested tuplets, that is, tuplets inside of other tuplets. Happily, these are pretty easy to handle in Sibelius. Back at the beginning of the piece, the harp part has a 9-tuplet with a nested 4-3 quadruplet inside of it, making a total of 10 notes instead of 9. I already showed you how to enter the 9-tuplet, which is technically called a non-uplet for the pedantically inclined. To enter the nested tuplet, we'll select the last 3 notes of the 9-tuplet. If we try to just hit Command 4, we'll get an error indicating that our notes won't fit. However, we can go into Note Input, into Triplets, and select Other. Now, in this text box, we can actually type 4:3. We do want the ratio to appear in this case, and I want to bracket around just these 4 notes, so we'll select those options. If you forget to change them in this dialog box, you can always select the tuplet and hit Command-Shift-I or Control-Shift-I on Windows to bring up the inspector and change them there. Unfortunately, it wipes out all the existing notes, but we can quickly enter them back in again. Next, sometimes we want to hide tuplets. Here's an example from the Aleatoric section of this piece. In this case, we don't want to show the tuplet because the duration is not exact and will vary from player to player in the section. There are 2 ways to hide a tuplet. First, you can select the tuplet, hit Command-Shift-I or Control-Shift-I on Windows, change number to none, and bracket to no bracket. This works, but it does mean that it's hard to select the tuplet again if you want to adjust it, since there's no visual indication of where it is. A better way is simply to select the tuplet and hit Command-Shift-H or Control-Shift-H on Windows to hide it. Then it's still there, but just grayed out, so it's easy to select again if you need to. Finally, we've got this tricky section where we've had to fake the 3+4/12 time signature. This has 2 tuplet challenges in it. Let's take this bar in the first horn. This is what it's supposed to look like. However, remember that the actual time signature in this bar is 3+4/8. So if we were just to key this in normally, it would appear like this. There are 3 things that are wrong with this. First, the dotted quarter note should be a quarter note instead. Second, the next 8th note and quarter note should be marked as a triplet, even though they're really not. And finally, we have this particularly tricky split tuplet at the end, indicating a note that lasts for 1/3 of a quarter note.
I could have told you making them weird time signatures was only going to cause you trouble.
Yes, I know, but sometimes those weird time signatures are necessary.
You say so.
Anyway, let's start by converting this dotted quarter note into a quarter note. This is fairly straightforward. We simply need to make this a duplet, that is a 2-to-3 ratio tuplet. These are pretty common to see in triplet time signatures like 6/8, especially in older scores. To do this, you would think we could just select the dotted quarter, hit triplets, then other, then enter 2:3. Unfortunately, that results in this dialog saying that it's too long to fit in this tuplet. So what I ended up doing was making it an 8th note instead, then selecting the 8th note and the 2 following rests doing the same thing, and then converting the 8th note into a quarter note. Finally, we'll hide the tuplet using Command-Shift-H. Otherwise, a little bit of bracket will still be visible. Next comes this fake triplet. It turns out that this is actually quite easy. We'll select the 8th note and following quarter notes and hit the tuplet button again. This time we'll just enter 3:3 as the ratio and hit OK. For some reason, Sibelius erased everything but the first note, but we can easily key the other note back in again and add the ties back in. The last tuplet-related challenge is probably the most difficult. To make a split tuplet, we're actually going to make something that looks like a tuplet without actually using the tuplet functionality in Sibelius. First, the bracket. This is pretty easy. We'll select the note, go to Notations, then Lines, or just hit L. Scroll down to the bracket section and find the one that says bracket above, Start. Honestly, that looks pretty good as it is, but we still need the 3. To add that, we'll go into the Text menu, hit Styles, scroll down to the Numbers Special section, select Tuplets, and type the number 3. This looks like a tuplet, but it's in the wrong spot. Now we can try to drag it into the right spot on top of the bracket, but it just won't go. That's because magnetic layout is causing Sibelius to move all the notations in the score in order to avoid collisions. Normally this is what we want, but in this case we actually want the text to overlap the bracket, so we can turn magnetic layout off just for this one bit of text by selecting it, right-clicking, going to magnetic layout and selecting off. Now it's positioned correctly, but the line is just going straight through the number instead of being blanked out when it passes under the text. So our last little tweak is to select the 3, go to the inspector, check the Erase checkbox to erase the background, and there we have it, a fake split tuplet. Next up, we're going to talk about beams.
You know, I got a lumberjack friend who...
First, we're going to talk about fanned beams, also called feathered beams.
Now, I don't recall him sticking feathers on his beams.
And we're just going to stop right there. Happily, fanned beams are super easy in Sibelius. Just select the beam you want to make into a feathered beam. Go to the keypad and hit the feathered beam button in the direction you want, and that's it. Some people like to beam together longer notes like 8s followed by shorter notes like 16s and then 32nds so that the shorter ones are closer together toward the feathered part of the beam. But unfortunately, Sibelius doesn't support making a beam feathered unless it's all the same type of note. So in this case, I've just used a tuplet. If you do use a tuplet, make sure you hide the number as well. Next, splitting beam groups. Sometimes, like with these nested tuplets in the harp, we want to split the secondary beams in the middle, but not the entire beam. Again, this is easy in Sibelius. We simply select the note where we want to split the secondary beams and hit the Start Secondary Beam button. To go the other way, just hit the Middle of Beam button. And finally, beaming across bars. This can be very difficult in some programs, but again, Sibelius makes this easy. In this passage in the second violin, I want the beaming to reflect the logical beats, not the physical bars. This means that the groups of 16ths between the rests should be grouped together. To accomplish this, I'll just select this first 16th note at the end of bar 11, hit the Start Beam button, then move to the last note I want in the beam and hit the End Beam button. I can keep doing this for the rest of the passage until I get the notation that I want.
So you just showed him how to hit buttons on that there keypad.
Well, yeah, basically. But hey, this is harder in some programs than it is in Sibelius.
Yeah, I still reckon they could have figured that one out on their own.
Now we're going to talk about challenges related to the actual notes, different note heads, unusual accidentals, and so forth. The first example we'll look at is these harmonics in the violins. We want the solo violin part to use artificial harmonics just like the glialtri part below it. This may be a little hard to see, so we'll zoom in to demonstrate the difference. To change the note heads, first enter the notes as if they were chords like this. Then select the top notes, go to the Notations menu, select Type in the Notehead section, and find the diamond option near the top. And there we have it, harmonics. Next, we want to enter some key clicks for the bassoons and contra. For these, we're going to use X noteheads. To change them, we'll do exactly the same thing as before. Select the notes, go into the Notehead Type menu, and select Cross. Notice that this is a whole family of noteheads. If we were to change the notehead of a half note or whole note, it would look like an X with a circle around it. Now, the other thing we want to do in this case, since most playback libraries do not support key clicks, is to turn off playback for these notes. We don't really want a bunch of Ds being played fortissimo right here. This is a little weird in Sibelius, but to do this you'll need to open the inspector by hitting Command-Shift-I or Control-Shift-I on Windows, then turn off playback on passes 1 through 8. To be honest, I'm not sure what all these different passes are, but turning them all off ensures that it never plays back at all. Next, we have an interesting challenge. There's what amounts to a scream here in the baritone part. What, they were listening to you going on about Sibelius for hours on end too and just couldn't take it anymore? Nice try, Billy. Anyway, the way we want to notate this is as an arrow notehead, meaning as high as possible, with a glissando through one stemless note to another one of indeterminate pitch. We'll cover the gliss later, but for now we'll talk about the noteheads. The arrow notehead is super easy. Just open up the Notehead Type menu again and select the arrow up notehead. Notice that not only did Sibelius position the arrow so that it's centered on the stem, but it even automatically removed the ledger lines, which is exactly what we want, because it's indeterminate pitch. The stemless notes are just as easy. Notice that I've positioned this center note so that it's just barely intersecting the glissando line. We'll select these two notes, go back into the Notehead Type menu, and select Headless. And that looks exactly how we want it. At the very end of the piece, we want this harp passage to appear in Q-size notes to indicate a cadenza-like passage. Now, we could just select small noteheads like we did before with the X notes and harmonics, but in this case we actually want the beams and stems to be smaller too. To do this, we simply select the whole passage that we want to be Q-sized, then click on the Q-size checkbox at the top of the inspector. Now, I actually selected the slurs as well, and I want those to be normal sized, so I'll just select both slurs and the diminuendo and uncheck the Q-size checkbox on those. Simple as that. The next challenge isn't so much changing noteheads as seeing what Sibelius does with augmented unisons. Here in the clarinet staff, we have a G and a G sharp both being played at once. As you can see, it puts two accidentals before the unison, making sure that the sharp or flat is first, so that nobody confuses it with a cancelled out double sharp or double flat, which would start with a natural sign. This works, although a lot of times this is notated as a split stem. Sibelius does kind of have support for split stems in the Symbols menu, but they have to be positioned manually, and there's no playback support. Shortly after this part in the clarinets, we have a measured tremolo, which we want to be played staccato. The typical notation for this is 2 staccato dots over a single notehead. Happily, Sibelius actually has a pretty powerful and comprehensive way to add new articulations. If we look at the keypad and go to the 4th panel, we can see 3 blank boxes. These are spaces where you can put up to 3 custom articulations. To do this, we'll go to the Notations menu and hit the little pop-out icon in the Symbols section. Next, we'll scroll down to the Articulations section, and you'll see that there are 3 blank boxes there, too. Actually, there are 2 rows of articulations, and each row has 3 blank boxes. The upper row defines what the articulation will look like above a notehead when the stem is pointing down, and the lower row defines what the articulation will look like below a notehead when the stem is pointing up. Now, the order of articulations in this list is the order in which they will stack. The ones to the left will be closer to the notehead. We want our double staccato to behave just like a normal staccato, so we'll use the first blank box, which is right next to the normal staccato articulation, and so we'll stack in the same way. We'll select it, hit Edit, and this screen will pop up where we can define a new symbol. Happily, Sibelius already has a double staccato symbol predefined, so we'll hit Add, then find the double staccato symbol and hit OK. Notice that the symbol automatically populated on the lower row of articulations as well, which is exactly what we want. Now we'll hit Close, and we can apply our double staccato articulation to all of these notes. However, you may have noticed that they're not appearing in the right place. They're above or below the staff, not in the middle of the staff as we want them to be. To fix this, we'll go to the Appearance menu and click on Engraving Rules, then Articulation. You'll see that our new double staccato articulation is not allowed in the staff or inside the starter end of a slur. Well, that's not what we want, so we'll check those checkboxes so that it looks just like the staccato articulation right next to it. And now you'll see that it appears inside the staff just as we want. Sibelius even lets us define playback rules for this new articulation. We'll go to the Play menu, then hit Dictionary, and go to the Articulations tab. First, we'll look at what the normal staccato articulation looks like. It has a sound ID change to plus staccato, and it adjusts the duration of each note to 50% of its written duration. So we'll go to Custom Articulation 1 and input exactly the same values. And you can even hear when we select the note now that it's playing back staccato. Now let's talk briefly about accidentals.
You mean wrong notes? I'm just kidding, partner. Keep your britches on.
Alright, so first, accidentals in parentheses. One really nice thing that Sibelius does is that it automatically inserts a cautionary accidental if that same note was altered at the end of the previous bar. But sometimes we want to insert a cautionary accidental at a different spot. Perhaps there was a bar's rest in between, but we still want to alert the player that the alteration is cancelled, or perhaps the harmony is different than what one might expect. In measure 18 in the Harp part, the previous A had a natural, and this seems to be a D major chord, so it would be logical for the player to just assume that this is an A natural. So we want to insert a cautionary accidental just to make sure they raise their A pedal. Now, it's easy to just insert an accidental by hitting the appropriate button on the keypad here. But what if we want parentheses around it? Well, there's a whole section on the keypad solely dedicated to accidentals. So if we go to the Accidentals section, you'll see that the numeric keypad Enter key, or Option V, if you don't have a numeric keypad, will toggle on and off a parenthesized accidental for the selected note. Finally, quarter tones. Modern Sibelius has fairly good support for quarter tones. They don't play back, which we'll talk about in the next video, but Sibelius knows what they mean and will treat them properly wherever they occur. Here's an example in the baritone part. We want this second D to be a quarter flat, so on the accidentals panel of the keypad, we'll hit 6 for quarter flat. Notice that the note afterwards now has a natural because Sibelius understands that a quarter tone is not just a symbol, it's a real accidental. And in fact, the glissando actually goes downwards now instead of going upwards as it previously did. Here's another example where the third clarinet is playing a multiphonic. We'll talk about that fingering diagram in a minute, but for now, look at this bottom note. This should be a B quarter sharp, so we'll hit 5 on the accidental keypad, and we'll have to do the same for the tight note. Now, if we go into the clarinet 3 part, you'll see that it's transposed correctly. A B quarter sharp transposed up by a major second is a C 3/4 sharp.
That'll come in real handy for pitch bends on my guitar.
Yeah, I suppose it would. The last topic in this section is aleatoric boxes.
What does that have to do with Noteheads and Accidentals?
Well, nothing, but I couldn't find a better section to stick it in.
Gotcha.
Near the end of this piece, the violins need to play a pattern over and over in an unsynchronized way for a certain length of time. This is often notated using something called an aleatoric box. It consists of a box around the notation that should be played repeatedly, with a thick or a wavy line lasting up until the point where the player should stop playing, like this. So how do we accomplish this in Sibelius? Let's just start with this tuplet here. Now, because this doesn't take up a particular length of time, it doesn't make much sense for this to be a tuplet, so we'll just select it and hit Command-Shift-H to hide it. Now we'll put a box around this. That's pretty easy too. We'll select the notes we want the box around. Hit L for lines, search for box, and select it. That will insert something that is honestly more of a line than a box, but that's okay. We can select it and drag the handles until it's the size and position that we want. Then we need to insert the thick line afterwards. To do this, let's create a new thick line style. I'll scroll down and select the line style, then hit New and type in a name, thicker line. Then I'll change the line so that it's one staff space wide and horizontal. Then I'll hit OK. Now that I have this line style, I can select the rests that I want the line to appear over, hit L, and select the new thicker line we just created. Well, it did appear, but it's above the staff. Even if I drag it down to the middle of the staff, you can see that it jumps below the staff. You've probably guessed by now that this is due to magnetic layout, so I can turn that off on both this line and the continuation on the next page. Okay, we're nearly there. All we need to do is hide these rests. If we select these bars, then go to Home, Filters, Rests to filter our selection so that we are only selecting the rests and not the line we just made. Then we hit Command-Shift-H to hide them. You'll see that the rests in the first measure are hidden, but the whole rests in the blank measures are still there. So why is this, and how do we hide these? Well, this is so that if all the notes and rests are hidden in a decondensed part, a whole rest still appears where it should. So how do we hide them? Well, if we're not using the decondensing functionality, which in our case we're not, we can go to the Appearance tab, then select Engraving Rules and Bar Rests, and then uncheck the Use Bar Rests and Multi-Rests when all notes and rests in a bar are hidden option. But if you're using the decondensing functionality, you can't do that. In that case, you can select the rests and actually hit the delete button and completely delete the rests out of the score. Normally this isn't recommended since it will leave a sort of gap in that part where you can't actually insert notes, but in this case it's fine. Notice that you do have to individually select each rest and delete it. You can't select a bunch of them at once. If you do get rid of the rests this way and need to undo it, you can paste in music from somewhere else in the piece and then delete it, and the rests will appear again as usual. To be honest, I didn't stress test lyrics too much in this piece, and there are a whole lot of other things that I would consider in a lyric stress test, like multiple verses for things like hymns, lyrics above and below the staff for multiple voices, whispering and other non-sung notes, alternate languages on separate lines in different fonts, non-Western and right-to-left language support.
Don't forget yodeling.
And, yodeling. However, there were a couple things I did test. First, elisions, that is, where you have two syllables, usually where one ends on a vowel and the other starts with the same vowel stuffed together into a single note. In Which Shall I Choose? That occurs in measure 7, where the baritone sings the existing one, but the and x are sung in a single syllable, sounding something like viex. This is more common in languages without a lot of diphthongs like Spanish or Latin, but you do occasionally see this in English, including in my rather contrived example here. As it turns out, this is very easy to accomplish in Sibelius. You simply type an underscore in between the two words, and it becomes the elision character, which looks like a small tie between the syllables. The other challenge was lyrics in italics. In this piece, I've used them to indicate a scream, but you'll often see words in other languages italicized, or words that are spoken rather than sung, along with a different note head. Again, this is quite easy in Sibelius. Simply select the text and hit Ctrl-I, just as you would in a word processor. Dynamics are another area where you wouldn't expect a lot of challenges, but there are actually a few that are worth noting. First, some less common dynamics like sforzando or rinforzando or mezzo forte pianissimo. Sibelius makes this super easy. In bar 13, clarinet 3 plays this very discordant multiphonic we saw earlier, and I want it to be played super loudly, so I want to mark it sffz. To do this, we simply type Command-E, Control-E on Windows, and while still holding Command or Control, type SFF, and then not Z because Command-Z would mean undo, but Option-Shift-Command-Z, or Control-Alt-Shift-Z on Windows. And yes, it's very easy to just hit Z while holding Control or Command by mistake and undo creating the whole expression. But as you can see, you can type arbitrary text, so if you want a rinforzando, you just type RF, or for mezzo forte pianissimo, you type mfpp, or... What are you... Hang on, let me tap for a minute. Mezzo fortissimo rinforzando piano. Wow, that's something all right. I hope you have a footnote along with that so that the performer has some vague clue as to what they're supposed to do.
Nah, I'll let them interpret it themselves.
Yeah, I think we'll change it back to SFFZ.
You're no fun.
Sometimes we have more than one voice on a staff, and we want to put dynamics for the upper voice above the staff, and for the lower voice below the staff. This might occur when we have two condensed parts on the same staff, or in a particularly complex piano piece. So how can we accomplish this in Sibelius? In measure 3, the bass trombone is playing forte crescendoing to fortissimo, and the tuba plays a forte piano crescendoing to forte. If we just insert dynamics as usual using Control-E for expression, they'll both appear below the staff. Now, we could just drag everything above the staff manually, but that gets really old if you have a lot of dynamics to input. So instead, we're going to create a new text style. To do this, we can navigate to the text menu and hit the little pop-out arrow under the Styles section. We'll copy the Expression style to a new one called Expression Above. Now, this is a little unintuitive, but to change the vertical position of this style, we're not going to edit the style itself. Instead, we're going to go over to the Appearance menu and click the pop-out menu in the Design and Position section. We'll select our Expression Above style, and then click on Above Middle of Staff. Now we can come back down here to the F and FF dynamics and select our new text style. And nothing happens. But don't fret, Sibelius tries not to move stuff around on us unless we specifically ask for it. In this case, we do want it to move, so we'll go over to the Appearance menu again and select Reset Position, and hey presto, it goes above the staff. Unfortunately, the hairpin doesn't go with it, so we still have to move that manually.
All that messing around seems a lot harder than just dragging it.
Maybe, but if you assign a shortcut to your new text style, it can be just as easy as entering normal dynamics.
But your hairpins are still in the wrong place.
Yeah, I haven't figured out that one yet. Maybe I could create a new type of line and make a shortcut for that too. Speaking of hairpins, one notation that has become common in modern music is niente hairpins, that is, crescendos from nothing or diminuendos to nothing. These are usually notated by a little circle representing 0 at the beginning or the end of the hairpin. In Sibelius, both normal and niente hairpins are different types of line. So to enter one, we'll simply select the passage that we want the niente hairpin underneath. In our piece, this whole note in the bassoons, then hit L to bring up the lines menu, then search for diminuendo, and we'll see the one that we're after in the hairpins section. And there you go, it's that easy. The last challenge is non-horizontal hairpins. At the end of the harp part, we have this decrescendo to pianissimo. If we leave it horizontal, it looks pretty silly because the music is going upwards and the PPP is very far removed from the notes. So we'd like to make this hairpin diagonal. Again, this is very easy in Sibelius. We simply select the end of the hairpin and drag it upwards. And due to magnetic layout, the PPP goes upwards as well, which is exactly what we want. We've got a few different glissando challenges to show in this section. First up is Microtonal Glissandi. In measure 4, we want the baritone to slide slightly down from a D to a D quarter flat. So we'll select the first D, hit L to bring up the lines menu, then select glissando. That worked pretty well. Notice that Sibelius realized that we're sliding downward, so it angled the glissando line appropriately even though the notes are at the same vertical position. However, there's not nearly enough space between the two notes, and it would be very easy for a performer to miss the glissando entirely. The easiest way of fixing this problem is simply to drag the second note out a little bit. The next challenge is a glissando to a grace note. This is particularly common in harp music, and indeed that's where we've used it in this piece. At the climax of the piece, we have a bunch of fast glissandi in the harp, and we want to tell the harpist what note they should end on. Unfortunately, if we insert a glissando on the first note here, it will gliss to the next full note, not the grace note. And in fact, there's not a great way of telling Sibelius to do so. We have to manually select the right end of the glissando and drag it down to the grace note. We'll repeat the same procedure with the next glissando. Now, the glissando after this presents a new difficulty, the glissando across staves. Again, if I just insert a glissando, Sibelius will automatically pin it to the next note. I can adjust it down to the next staff, but you'll see that what Sibelius does is to avoid the hairpin going across the staves due to magnetic layout. This is not what we want. So we have to turn magnetic layout off on the glissando, and then it will intersect it appropriately. However, you'll see that no matter what we do, it won't intersect the next staff. That's maybe okay for this grace note, but when we insert a glissando down to the bottom B flat, you'll see that even if we turn magnetic layout off, it just won't go down to that note. The easiest way of solving this is to insert a non-magnetic gliss. To do this, we deselect everything, hit L for the lines menu, and select Glissando. Our cursor turns blue to indicate that wherever we click is where the glissando will appear. So we'll click on the first note. Now we'll need to turn off magnetic layout on the dynamics to allow our line to cross them. And finally, we can drag the line down to the bottom B flat without issue. The final glissando challenge is sliding from one note through a stemless note to a third note. Unfortunately, Sibelius only supports sliding from one note to the next one, so we'll end up just inserting a glissando and then manually stretching it to the third note. There are other ways to tackle some of these challenges, such as the Line Between Notes plugin by the prolific Bob Zawalich. However, I generally try not to use plugins if I can avoid it. Some plugins are simply shortcuts for mundane tasks, and those are great. But a lot of them, particularly in Sibelius, implement workarounds for functionality that Sibelius doesn't really natively support, which can lead to issues down the road, like stuff looking wrong in the parts, or looking wrong when the music is changed, or whatever. Of course, the solutions I'm showing you have the same problems, but I know good and well that I'm manually adjusting stuff, and so I'll probably have to readjust them down the road.
But plugins do make your bathroom smell nice.
What?
What?
I have no idea what you were talking about.
You know them Glade plugins you stick in your bathroom?
Oh, wow. Was that an attempt at a joke?
Well, it would have been until you made it not funny.
Okay, sure. Anyway, let's move on to our final section of notation challenges about playing techniques.
Finally.
This is our last section, but we've got quite a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. We'll start with textual playing techniques. One example is the violas in measure 6, which should be con legno. To achieve this in Sibelius, we simply type Command-T or Control-T on Windows to input text. Likewise, for Fluttertongue, we can use FLZ, short for German Flatterzunge, in the flute 2 part. Since this is a condensed staff, I'll put a 2 in front of it to indicate that it only applies to the second player, and drag it down below the staff. I've also got the staves set up so that the flute 2 staff will play back, and the condensed staff is muted in the mixer. This allows us to have flute 1 play normally, and flute 2 play Fluttertongue at the same time. And finally, we can enter the text key clicks on the bassoon and contrabassoon staves here. As you can see, you can have multiple pieces of text attached to the same note. Both the A2 and key clicks are different pieces of text. Next, many playing techniques are denoted by symbols. For example, the first few notes in the double basses should be snap pizz, or Bartók pizz if you prefer. There's a standard symbol for that, and you can insert it by hitting Z to bring up the Symbols menu and selecting the Snap To option in the Common section. Unfortunately, I haven't found a way of selecting a whole passage and applying a symbol to all of them at once, which would be handy for this passage where every note is a snap pizz. Likewise, the harp harmonics in measures 4 through 8 can be entered by hitting Z for symbols and searching for the harmonic symbol. Again, a way to apply this to every note in a certain range would be nice. And the stopped horn in measure 16 is a plus symbol, though unfortunately searching for plus or stop doesn't turn up anything. You have to type mute instead, even though muted and stopped horn are two different techniques. What about custom symbols that aren't built in? We have a multiphonic in clarinet 3 in measure 13, and as you might expect, Sibelius does not have built-in symbols for every possible multiphonic fingering on every instrument. There are custom fonts that you can use to input woodwind fingerings as text, but instead I've made a custom fingering graphic using a free online tool I'll link to in the description. So how do we insert it into the music? Again, Sibelius makes it nice and easy. In the Notations tab, we'll hit the Graphic button, select our image file, and then select the spot in the score we want to insert it. And that's a little bigger than I was wanting, so I'll just resize it using the handles, holding down Shift to ensure that the aspect ratio stays the same. Notice the little gray line pointing to the clarinet 3 staff, indicating that that's where it's anchored. Then I can move it a little to the left, and I can even drag the staff downward a little to give it a bit more room. And there we have it. Now we'll take a look at trills. For the most part, these are pretty straightforward. We'll select the note that we want to put the trill on, hit Z to bring up the Symbols menu, search for trill, and there you have it. If you want a wavy line over your trill, you can instead hit L to bring up the Lines menu, search for trill, and then drag the line as far as you want it. Now, on this second trill, we actually want an A flat, and believe it or not, there is no way in Sibelius to insert a trill with a flat above it. We can go over to the inspector and adjust the interval, but it doesn't change the appearance of the trill at all. Seeing as they have every other musical symbol known to mankind and then some, I really figured this would be in there. I mean, it's been standard notation for well over 200 years, so this seems like a glaring omission. However, we can create our own trill with flat symbol and even a trill with flat line.
Is this going to take a long time?
Well, it's a bit convoluted, but stick with me. I do have to give a shout out to Daniel Spreadberry, whose video I watched in order to figure out how to actually do this.
What, you're admitting that you actually didn't know something, Mr. Flannelmouth?
Yes, I did a bunch of research in order to put these videos together.
Research? You mean looking up stuff on the internets?
Well, yeah, basically.
That ain't research. When I was doing my PhD in cattle herding, my advisor taught me...
Let's just get on with it, shall we? First, we'll hit the little pop-out icon next to the Symbols menu and scroll down to the User Defined section. A trill with flat is composed of two other symbols, a trill symbol and a small flat that goes above it. If we scroll down to the Accidentals section, we can see that there's already a flat symbol defined, but it's too big. So the first thing we'll need to do is to create a small flat symbol. If we select the big flat symbol and hit Edit and scroll down a little bit, you can see that it's using a music font called Common Symbols. What's a music font? It's actually just the same as a text style that we created earlier. So we'll click on Music Fonts, select Common Symbols, hit New Text Style, then Edit, and call our new text style Common Symbols Q Size. We'll leave everything the same except for the two size parameters at the top, which we'll set to 2/3 of their current size, which is 13 points. We'll hit OK, and you'll see that our shiny new text style appeared in the list. Now we'll go down to the User Defined Symbols section and hit Edit on the first blank symbol. We'll call the symbol Small Flat. Then we'll select our new music font, scroll down to the flat symbol, hit OK, and you'll see our new small flat symbol in the list. Now we'll select the empty symbol next to it, hit Edit, and call it Trill with Flat. Then we'll hit Add, find the trill symbol in the ornament section, and hit OK. Then we'll do the same thing and select the small flat symbol that we created earlier. Well, that's the right size, but it's overlapping the trill symbol. So we'll just move it up by about 2.5 spaces and to the right by 1.1 spaces. Of course, you can use the arrow buttons or arrow keys to adjust these as well, but these are the values that look good to me. Now we'll hit OK, and we have our new trill with flat symbol. Looks pretty good. Now, we still need to create one other symbol. When you have a trill that goes across two systems, the trill will often have a parenthesized version that appears on the second system. That parenthesized trill is a separate symbol. To create that, we'll select the next blank symbol and hit Edit. We'll call it Parenthesized Trill with Flat. Very original, I know. First, we'll hit Add and select the parenthesized trill. Then we'll do the same thing as we did earlier. Hit Add, then select the small flat symbol. Move it up by 2.5 spaces and to the right by 1.1 spaces, and hit OK. Now we have all the symbols we need to create the trill line. So we'll close the Symbols dialog and hit the pop-out icon next to the Lines section. First, we'll find the existing trill line, then hit New. We'll call it Trill with Flat. All we have to do is for the Start symbol, select our new Trill with Flat custom symbol, and for the Continuation symbol, select our parenthesized Trill with Flat. Hit OK, and you can see our new line in the list. Finally, we'll go over to the G we selected earlier, hit L to bring up the Lines pop-up, and scroll down to our new Trill with Flat line. Now we can either drag out the wavy line as far as we want it, or if we don't want it at all, we can drag it to the left so that it disappears. Finally, we can go to the inspector and adjust the playback to make sure that it's a fixed interval of 1/2 step. And there we have it, a custom trill symbol with proper playback. Of course, if you need a trill with sharp or trill with natural, you can use the same procedure to create those too. Alright, next up is Arpeggiando Symbols. In measure 16, we want the harp chord to be rolled downwards. In Sibelius, the arpeggiando symbols are considered lines, so we'll hit the L key to bring up the Lines menu and type in Arp. And we can quickly see in the arpeggios section there's an arpeggio down. We'll select that, and you'll quickly see that it's way too short. We'll select it and drag it down all the way to the bottom of the chord in the left hand. Now, unfortunately, there's no magnetic layout or anything that's keeping it tied to the bottom note in the left hand, so if we change that or move the staff, we'll have to remember to adjust the symbol again. Now let's take a look at laisser vibrer, or LV ties, which indicate that a note should be allowed to vibrate and should not be damped after the written duration. In Sibelius, these are quite simple to make. First, we select the note we want to tie, like this tam-tam hit in measure 16, and then we'll hit Option V, or numpad Enter for those who have a numeric keypad. That creates a giant tie, but if we hit Command-Shift-I or Control-Shift-I to go to the inspector, we can just click on the LV button, and it will change to an LV tie. Simple as that. Sometimes we have playing techniques and we want to gradually change from one to the other. This is particularly common in modern music when we have string players playing sul tasto on the fingerboard, then moving their bow gradually to the ordinary position and finally near the bridge, i.e. sul ponticello. In measure 8 in the viola part, we want to do exactly that. On this first note, we want to indicate sul tasto, so we'll hit Command-T or Control-T on Windows, enter ST, a common abbreviation for this. On the next note, we'll do the same thing and enter ORD, and on the last note, we'll enter SP for sul ponticello. Now, it's common to put arrows between these to indicate a gradual change. Sibelius doesn't support fully magnetic arrows between two pieces of text, but we can select the ST, hit L to bring up the Lines menu, and search for arrow. This didn't place it quite where we wanted it, but we can manually position it where we want it. Then we can do exactly the same thing to put a line between ORD and SP. You may find that in the parts, you'll have to adjust these a little differently to where they are in the score, or just drag the notes apart a little to allow more space for the lines. Another common string technique in modern scores is bow pressure wedges. These are lines that are horizontal on top, but thicker at the bottom where the player should press on the string more, like this example in the violin 2 part in measure 12. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any good way of creating these in Sibelius. It seems like custom lines have to be the same thickness throughout. So what I ended up doing was to create a whole bunch of lines that overlap each other at one end but are spread out at the other. So I'll select the passage in question and hit L, search for beam, and hit enter. Then I'll drag the line up a little to give me more room. Now I can copy and paste it, but you'll see that it actually appears above the other line and they won't overlap. So I'll turn magnetic layout off and drag one end down a little. Again, I'll do the same thing and drag the third line down a little more. And finally, I'll make a fourth line and drag it down a bit more. And there we have it, a bow pressure line, albeit a rather fiddly one that takes a good while to adjust. And now our very last playing technique, harp pedal diagrams. Of course, it's easy to create textual pedal changes with the text tool as we did earlier. In measure 2, while the harpist is playing this low D, we want them to change the pedals to F flat and B natural. So on this B natural, we can hit Command T or Control T on Windows, then F, hit the right mouse button and click on flat, or hit Command 9 on the numeric keypad, then hit enter, type B, right click, and select the natural sign. Then we can drag it down below the staff. However, it's nice to give the harpist a full pedal diagram at the beginning of the piece or right before any glissandi so they make sure they're playing the right notes. It may seem a little odd, but this is actually done via the text tool in Sibelius as well. There's a font that comes with Sibelius called Helsinki Text Standard, which complements the Helsinki Standard music font, and it has special characters in it for each pedal in a pedal diagram. In this font, capital L means pedal up, which is flat. Capital M means pedal in the middle, which is natural. Capital N means pedal down, which is sharp. And capital O produces the separator between the left and right pedals. We want to set the harp at D natural, C natural, B flat, E flat, F natural, G natural, A flat. So we'll hit Command T, select the Helsinki Text Standard font, and type MMLOLMML. And there you go, a harp pedal diagram. Now, of course, this is purely visual. It has no impact on the actual playing. Sibelius will not tell you if you have notes that aren't playable by your current pedal settings, and this won't affect any glissandi. But it will at least produce a nice engraving.
Well, what's next?
That's it. We've covered all the notation challenges.
Oh, well, jeepers. That makes me almost sad. I was kind of getting used to sitting here, listening to your voice, droning on, falling asleep.
Hey now, am I that boring?
Well...
Don't answer that. Also, we may be done with notation challenges, but we've got another whole video to go about playback, part preparation, music XML import and exports, pricing, and some features that are unique to Sibelius.
So you're telling me I might still get my nap in?
I guess? Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop it a like to help other people find it. And you may want to subscribe to this channel so that you get notified when the next video comes out. Until next time,
happy trails, partner!
Yeah, have a good one.